On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, how do you say Heehaw in Latin? Stay tuned. Well, hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization here at the Society, joined as always by my wonderful co-host and colleague, Grettelyn Darkey. Hi, Grettelyn.
Hi there, Joe.
And forgive me if I'm not in the best of voice today. I am just getting over some kind of cold, but we're coming to you with this episode as it airs on January 14th. And you'll notice that I still have Christmas lights up behind me. Of course, this is before the feast of the baptism of the Lord, and so we are still in the extended Christmas season, but I'm going to keep my Christmas lights up until the Feast of the Presentation on February 2nd. We're kind of continuing with this series that we've done on Advent and Christmastide and Chesterton's way of approaching it, and so we wanted to record something special for this particular date. But Grettelyn, anything you want to say before we get started?
No, I just hope that everyone still has their Christmas trees up. I hope there's no Christmas trees on the curb yet. And it's, still celebrating. I'm not eating any more cookies. I can't do that anymore. But
Yeah.
but we're still listening to carols. We're still having fun. So
yeah, it is one of those things, isn't it, that we almost tire of feasting more quickly than we do of fasting.
Yeah.
We're we're kind of weak in a certain way, and we need that energy to keep up with a long feast like this. But there was sort of in the medieval church, certainly, and at various times in history, sort of this extended sense of just the presence of the infant Christ, of the Holy Family throughout this longer season following following Epiphany. And the other day when researching, I found out that today, as of the airing of this podcast, January 14th was the historic date of the festival or the Feast of the Ass, or the Festum Asinorum, right? In medieval times, and I can't pretend that I knew that was particularly on this date, but it is something that I'm familiar with because it's something that comes up in Chesterton's writings, and it's something that's come up in my previous research. It's one of the examples of a feast of misrule, like they had in the medieval church, and is this a concept that you've ever heard of, Grettelyn? Are you familiar with this?
I have not, but I am so happy that it ever existed.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah, well, we spoke in a previous episode at some point about the boy bishop. I think it came up maybe just in passing. But this was one of the examples of the way that, especially in the medieval church, as I said, the peasants would take these opportunities of feast days and turn everything upside down. And it's such a Chestertonian idea, right? This idea that the boy becomes bishop for a day. Excuse me. And they would literally take a boy and dress him up in bishop's garb and give him the crozier and put a hat on him. And he would get to be in charge for the day. And he would actually preside over vespers in the church for the day. And it was just an example of this. And one of the terms that these feasts took in the medieval period, in addition to the Feast of Asses, the Feast of the Donkey, of the jackass, right? Because there's something kind of tongue-in-cheek and a little irreverent about it. It also took the title of the Deposuit. And the Deposuit, for those familiar with the prayer of the Magnificat in Latin, is the first word in the line, Deposuit potentes de sede et exaltabit humiles. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the humble or the lowly. This is one of those great exclamations of Our Lady in that prayer, and something Chesterton felt very, very attached to, that you see all over his writings. Really kind of a central image of Christianity. So we really don't have an agenda for this meeting for this episode, except to say we want to, of course, read Chesterton's great poem on the donkey, because that fits in very closely with what we're talking about. But any thoughts, Grettelyn, on just the theme of Christmas and of this topsy-turvydom, this turning inside out and upside down of the world, and why maybe the church felt called to that, and certainly Chesterton did?
Sure. So so many things remind me of the everlasting man, but this reminds me so much of the everlasting man when he talks about sort of the inversion of the family, the father, mother, child, inverted to child, mother, father. It's sort of just part and parcel of the incarnation, right? You get this, and this is the great feast of the incarnation, so it makes a lot of sense. And it does make sense that the church would recognize that and think about that and want to somehow celebrate that, especially in the medieval era when they just wanted to celebrate everything all the time. They had a great time then. Uh, but yeah, just I love this idea, this inversion idea. I think it's very playful in a way that we've talked before about the Saturnalia, and the way the Saturnalia wasn't really. It was kind of more like the slaves got to get their comeuppance against their masters a little bit, which was it's not really the same as sort of the tenderness of revering the child
Mm-hmm.
first and then the parents after. So it just has this sort of gentle, beautiful inversion that yes can sort of turn your brain upside down and make you not understand the world, but it's in a good way, I think. And even this, I mean, exalting the donkey, it's sort of this funny way of reminding us that we all can be a bit silly sometimes, and that's part of who we are, and we aren't God, and it's good to remember that.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's, you hear a lot of nonsense about this in scholarship where, I shouldn't say nonsense, but oversimplification, let's say, that
Mm,
the Feast of Fools or the Feast of Misrule or the Deposuit or the Feast of the Ass was kind of basically a pressure valve that had to get
mm,
let off every once in a while, because you had this very stratified society in medieval Europe, and you had the serfs, and everybody was kind of in their place, and there would have been more popular revolutions along the lines of what Tyler's revolution if it weren't for occasions like this where everybody could blow off some steam and break out of the social strata a little bit. And I'm not saying that there's no truth to that. You have to remember this was a time, for example, when there were sumptuary laws, right? Sumptuary laws dictating right down to like what colors you could dress in and what
mhm,
kinds of fabric you could wear, because it wasn't if you were of a lowly state in life, you shouldn't be wearing the royal purple or something like that. And so, in that context, it is kind of remarkable that a little boy gets dressed up as a bishop for the day, or you could put on a mystery play and mock King Herod,
mm,
and it's the shepherds who are exalted and celebrated. So there is something to that, but more than that, I think it is the central part of the Christian charisma that Christ came amongst the poor. And this was something Chesterton so appreciated. You mentioned the everlasting man. He writes beautifully about how in the mystery of Bethlehem, we usually think of heaven being above the earth and hell being below the earth, but here heaven is below the earth,
mm,
in the cave. And he says there is in that alone the touch of a revolution, as of the world turned upside down.
mm,
And then he goes on to speak about how there is this sense of in this, he says, in this buried divinity, there is the idea of an undermining of the world, of shaking the towers and palaces from below, even as Herod the great king felt that earthquake under him and swayed with his swaying palace.
mm,
He says, to the outside appearances, nothing had changed, he says, but it was, in truth, a huge unconscious usurpation that it raised like a revolt, and originally so obscure a revolt. Olympus still occupied the sky like a motionless cloud molded into the many mighty forms. Philosophy still sat in high places and even on the thrones of kings, when Christ was born in the cave and Christianity in the catacombs.
mm,
So, we've spoken before in this series about how Chesterton, God willing, one day, if he's St. Gilbert, he might be St. Gilbert of the Incarnation or St. Gilbert of Bethlehem by
mm,
honor, because it's so much part of his whole philosophy. It's central to the way he views the world, this inversion, this paradox, this turning upside down, this topsy-turvydom. So
Mm.
a lot to celebrate there, and a lot of good stuff from Chesterton to read this time of year. So that's why you have to extend this season, because you'll never get through it all if you just celebrate the 12 days of Christmas.
Right.
So
I love it. No, and that's part of why Christianity was always so subversive and challenging to the authorities, even from the very beginning, like you said with Herod, because any peasant can be a saint and can potentially be a greater saint than the king, and that's kind of like scary. And just about any man could be a priest, with very few exceptions. That's all throughout history, and so that's kind of an important point too that Chesterton makes elsewhere. I'm not sure where, but he was talking about evolution and basically the fact that Catholicism refutes it because a Black person could be a priest. So like
yeah.
that's a great sort of trumpet of equality that isn't present in some of the more pseudosciences.
Yeah, I mean, we take so much of this for granted, but it is a world in which slavery is kind of the norm. Certainly not thought of anything like the way we think of it today. And yeah, that social environment that Christ is born into, it makes it all the more striking. That he comes so unexpectedly to the poor, and again, Chesterton just waxes poetic about this in so many ways, talking about how the host of heaven holds converse face to face with these shepherds, the outcasts of society.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of beauty there. So let's talk about this particular feast, though. The Feast of the Ass. It's such a fun concept, and I have to admit, like I said, I knew a little bit. I knew the name, right? I knew I had heard of the Feast of the Ass, and that it was associated with these feasts of misrule, with the topsy turvy celebrations in society. I didn't know where it came from. I thought, asinine, right? Festum Asinorum. It's just an asinine feast. You are kind of acting like a jackass or a donkey, so maybe that's what it is. But it actually does originate in a celebration of the donkey. So I thought maybe we could learn a little bit about the history that I found in the Catholic Encyclopedia. So apparently, originally around this time, so it was around the same time of year. It was sort of in this extended Christmas season. There was a feast of the prophets. Now this is where it gets really funny, how traditions and customs evolve, because you think a feast of the prophets, how do we get from that to where we're going? Well, buckle up, right? So there's a 13th century manuscript that has kind of the rubrics for a liturgy, a paraliturgical celebration, um, in, as I said, the 13th century, so the 1200s, where there are 28 prophets taking place in this play. And so the rubric says, "Let the procession move into the church, in the center of which let there be a furnace and an idol for the brethren to refuse to worship." So, you can just imagine this taking place in like St. Patrick's Cathedral or something today, right? A furnace and an idol to refuse to worship. There's maybe a bit of a parable in there somewhere, but it says the procession filed into the choir. On one side were seated Moses, Amos, Isaiah, Aaron, Balaam and his ass. Put a pin in that. Zachary and Elizabeth, John the Baptist, and Simeon. And then on the other side, sat opposite, were the three Gentile prophets. That refers to Virgil, Nebuchadnezzar, and the Etherean Sibyl. And then the proceedings were conducted under the auspices of St. Augustine. I have no idea why. Apparently there was a pseudo graphic text, pseudepigraphic text associated with St. Augustine. It was written later in like the 6th century, but it was kind of bringing these elements of prophecy out of Virgil and Nebuchadnezzar and the Sibyl.
Okay.
So somebody takes the part of St. Augustine and presides, And he calls on each of the prophets in turn to testify to the Messiah and to the birth of the Messiah. And it doesn't end, oddly enough, with John the Baptist. It ends with the Sibyl. And it says, when the Sibyl had recited her acrostic lines on the signs of judgment, all the prophets sang in unison a hymn of praise to the long-sought Savior. So already it's just such a beautiful... That alone is a beautiful feast, right? But I love the little terse note that the article goes on to say next. In all this, the part that pleased the congregation the most was the role of Balaam and the ass. Hence the popular designation of this procession of the prophets being renamed the Feast of the Ass. And soon the part of Balaam was disassociated from its surroundings and expanded into an independent drama. So you can just imagine that, the churchmen are trying to have this wonderful, charismatic and didactic presentation of all the prophets testifying to the birth of our Lord, teaching people their Old Testament and a little bit of Greek literature along the way, Greek and Roman literature. And then the people just love that there's a donkey in church.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's just delightful. I love it. It seems very like Shakespearean in the most fun kind of way. I love it.
It does. And you could see Chesterton. Like, it's often fun to imagine if Chesterton had a time machine. You could picture Gilbert sitting in the choir and just so
stomping
beside
his feet
himself
when the ass came out
with the donkey. Yeah, the donkey in church.
Yep. Oh.
So it was that donkey. So it was Balaam's donkey originally. And then, this is the way customs and traditions develop. It eventually became sort of a celebration of all the donkeys, of the donkeys of Scripture. And it was Balaam's ass. It was certainly the ass that Christ would have ridden into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. But most especially the donkey that conveyed Mary to Bethlehem, and then later Mary and the infant Jesus on the flight to Egypt. And so this January 14th became a particular celebration of the feast of the flight into Egypt, and another of the feasts of the ass, right? There were multiple of these feasts. And there's this great little hymn that I found from like Old French. It's also in that article. From the eastern lands the asses come, beautiful and very brave, well fitted to bear burdens. Up, Sir Ass, and sing. Open your pretty mouth. Hay will be yours in plenty, and oats in abundance. And
Sweet.
Just again, so Chestertonian, right? You could picture that. But my favorite part, before we get into a little more Chesterton here, but I had to stop upon this because there's another rubric for this particular feast that was in an instructional, like in a missal. And I'm going to read it in Latin at first, just because it's so fun to hear. But here's the rubric in Latin. And even if you don't know Latin, see if you recognize at least a couple of words, one or two, from this little reading. In fine missae sacerdos versus ad populum, vice ita missa est, ter hinhanabit. Populus vero vice Deo gratias ter respondebit, hinham, hinham, hinham. So I'll help you out with the translation, but I nearly spit out my drink reading that when I came across this in the article. The translation is, at the end of the Mass, the priest, having turned to the people, in lieu of saying the traditional ite missa est, go, the Mass is ended, will bray thrice. And the people, instead of replying Deo gratias, respond, Heehaw, heehaw, heehaw.
That is so beautiful.
Isn't that wonderful? This isn't a medieval liturgical text.
Oh my goodness.
What a delight.
I absolutely love that. I love that. And I could see why people would love that. That is so fun. And yeah.
It is so fun. And there is this remark. I didn't copy it into my document from the from the Catholic Encyclopedia article, but it says something to the effect of the people, without apparently any sense of the utter inappropriateness of this. Like, it was, the author of the Catholic Encyclopedia article, you could tell
They're pretty shocked.
was both shocked but also like enjoying himself. Like, this is a trip, So it's just such a delight. So I will have links to these things in the show notes, because I was just transported. I was beside myself learning about all of this stuff. But now it is. I just love that there is in medieval church Latin, a onomatopoeic rendering of how to sound like a donkey.
Love it.
Yeah, Heehaw. It's spelled Hinham. And if you try to say that with a, Heehaw, it sounds like a donkey. It's great.
Oh, man. That's so fun.
Well, I don't want to belabor, but I do think we should end on Chesterton's tribute to the donkey. And we have that poem to read. But I also wanted to quote from our own wonderful President Dale Alquist, because it is remarkable that, Chesterton has this philosophic view that just lasts throughout his whole career. The donkey is one of his, one of his earliest writings. We don't even really know when he would have written it. It was published certainly in The Wild Knight, which was Chesterton's second book, a collection of poetry. So he had Grey Birds at Play, and then The Wild Knight and other poems. But Dale says about this poem, the donkey is a microcosm of Chesterton and his philosophy. Already present in this sweet little poem are the elements that would fill his writing for the rest of his life: paradox, humor, humility, wonder, the defense of the poor and the simple, the rebuke of the rich and the worldly wise. The other recurrent theme, seen in everything from his Father Brown stories to his public debates, is the presentation of a character we would at first dismiss, but who surprises us by being in direct contact with truth itself. Be careful before you call someone an ass. He may be carrying Christ. So that's Dale's insight on this great poem. But would you care to read it, Grettelyn?
Sure, I'd love to read it.
All right.
Let me grab it here. This is definitely one of my favorites. The Donkey. When fishes flew and forests walked, and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry, and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody on all four-footed things. The tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will. Starve, scourge, deride me, I am dumb, I keep my secret still. Fools, for I also had my hour, one far fierce hour and sweet. There was a shout about my ears, and palms before my feet.
Fantastic. And it's something so touching to think, which only occurs to you in considering things like this, that Christ's life really starts. There's animals. There's animals as parts of Christ's life in important ways, which is kind of neat just to think of, that he begins in that cattle stall in the manger, and then is led to his final part of his mission on this donkey. So
yeah, I just love the Chestertonian twist at the end. That's such a beautiful, such a signature thing right there. You sort of get it at the very last line, and I love that. That's great poetry right there.
Yes, indeed. And it's all over his writing, as Dale says, but it's also all over the season of Christmas. And that's why we wanted to take a little time just for a short episode today to talk about the Feast of the Ass, the Feast of the Donkey. It includes and captures that donkey, but also that other wonderful donkey who helped Christ on a previous journey, both as an unborn babe and also as an infant or toddler over into Egypt. And so good to remember these other figures that can be just as inspiring to us as the great prophets, I guess. So, any last thoughts before we close today, Grettelyn?
I just hope that some people take the time to read that article and, I don't know, maybe do your own act out version of the ceremony. It'd be kind of fun.
Yes, it would be fun. I don't recommend taking it to the liturgical council at your parish and asking if you could
Nope.
reinstate the ritual. But for a household play in the domestic church, I think maybe it's appropriate. So.
But if they do, take lots of pictures because, like, we would love to see that.
So much. Well, thank you so much, Grettelyn, for taking some time with us today and
Thanks,
for
Joe.
discussing this great topic.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, viewers and listeners. We hope you are still having a wonderful, extended season of joy and merriment and topsy-turvydom when everything's turned upside down. And here at the darkest time of the year, the light is still shining so brightly. And so we hope that you're still celebrating that light and enjoying that light. We hope that you will continue to tune in to our podcast. Join us next week, same time. Make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to get notifications. And until next time, hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. God bless.